All right. Hello and welcome to my ecotourism presentation on Mackinac Island. Um, as someone who grew up in Michigan, I always thought Mackinac Island was a really appealing place to visit. There's a lot of unique things about the island that just make it really stand out. For one, in which most people know, is that there's a complete automobile ban on the island. So there's no cars. Everyone pretty much gets around either on foot, by bicycle, or by horses. You see a lot of horse-drawn carriages, bicycle-drawn carriages. Um, and for me, when I was thinking of a site to do for this project, um, that made a lot of sense to me to want to do this for ecotourism. But that's not the only environmentally friendly appeal of the island, and we'll get into more of those. Um, so, little fun fact was that um, Mackinac Island was actually the nation's second national park. It was given that title following, of course, the first national park, Yellowstone, and since then that has changed. Um, the U.S. government gave Mackinac Island to the state of Michigan, who then established it as uh, Michigan's first state park, and it remains to be that to this day. Um, so I find that really interesting because it was actually a national park at one point, and um, that really just goes to show you how special this location is, and that people have a lot of faith in it. It's very unique, and certainly um, a treasure of Michigan, in my opinion. So we're going to talk about some of the appeals. Um, there's lots of social factors, lots of historical sites such as Fort Mackinac. Um, just the whole atmosphere on the island is kind of like taking a step back in time to a time when there were no automobiles. You're not running around cars as a pedestrian. It's just kind of quiet and nice. And I've never really experienced another place in the world that was quite like it. So it's definitely a good place to visit and a good place to learn some things, especially if you're into history. Um, and I think that the culture has a lot to offer. There's just gardens lining the streets everywhere. Mackinac Island is actually a self-sustaining island. They grow most of their own food. 80% of the island is considered parkland. Um, and then outside of those historical factors, like the Fort Mackinac, and just uh, the uniqueness of the island being having the automobile ban, which is something that I think might apply or might really appeal to a lot of people who are interested in ecotourism. There are actually some really cool geological features, um, like we went over in class. Three big appeals to people interested in ecotourism are megafauna, megaflora, and megalith structures. So while the island doesn't really have much to offer for megafauna and megaflora, I don't know if you could argue that the horses, I don't know. I don't really know if that constitutes as megafauna. I don't really think so because they're domesticated for transportation and things of that sort. But it does have some really neat megalith appeal to it, and we'll look closer at these. So this is um, a picture of a family posing on top of Ark Rock. It's on the island. It's just a naturally occurring arc from stone, and it's really pretty. If you go to the island, it is a, it is a pretty popular attraction. People want to see the Ark Rock, because I know that when I think of Michigan, um, in other areas, I don't necessarily assume that there's going to be these cool geological structures, but really the Ark Rock is quite striking, and it's a great place for a picture and for memories for the whole family. And then there's also this. Um, this is called the Sugar Loaf. So it's just an enormous stack of sandstone, um, and I don't. I'm not really sure, but it looks like um, there's some internal openings too. So I'm sure that's probably been explored to some extent. But mostly just this huge sandstone structure that just kind of juts out of nowhere. And plus, I think the name Sugarloaf is really creative and makes it look kind of cute. Here's another picture of it. You can see the whole thing. Really, I don't know. It kind of looks like a mountain you'd like see in a Dr. Seuss book or something. It's really quite special. Um, okay, and so this isn't really talked about a lot. And in my research on the island, it it didn't go much into the Native American occupation of the island because it was settled by indigenous people long before um, people from Europe put their hands on the island, and that is going to be discussed in greater depth in my SWOT analysis, just about how um, I don't know, the lack of acknowledgement that the indigenous people um, have as far as this location is concerned. Um, I would consider that a weakness, especially in today's age where we're kind of trying to acknowledge those injustices done to indigenous people throughout our history. And I think that Mackinac Island moving forward as a really desirable tourist attraction is going to have to kind of reconcile um, with these indigenous people in some ways, and I guess it all just kind of starts by acknowledging that once upon a time it was theirs. Um, so some of the tribes that my research um, said lived here: the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi tribes over 400 years ago. So that's just something to be mindful of. Like I said, I'll go into greater detail in that during my SWOT analysis, but definitely something worth mentioning, and in my opinion, is a potential weakness um, to the appeal of the ecotourism potential if we're not acknowledging and addressing its indigenous history, um, and more about the native culture. The name Mackinac is derived from the Native American term meaning place of the great turtle, which I think is just really special. Um, I don't know, such an awesome name for an awesome island. So there is still a fort remaining to this day. It's Fort Mackinac. It was first established by the French in 1715, and control of the fort has, I think, it jumped from French to British control, and ultimately to control of the United States. And the fort is still there. It used to house soldiers and their families, and was a key strategic point for a couple wars. So, yeah, so the French gave control of the fort to the British following the French and Indian War, and then eventually it was claimed by the United States. So it's there's a lot of military history on the island too. So that's one of the things that some people find interesting about ecotourism is cultural history, um, history of war, and I do find that pretty interesting. But m- my appeal on the island mostly stems from the fact that it's just really eco-friendly, and just the whole situation with an automobile ban. It seems to be really working wonders for the island, and just kind of makes it like a beacon of sustainable practices, and people love to visit it. And I know that I've had a great time there as well in the past. So Mackinac Island becomes under the control of the United States after the War of 1812. Okay. Um, yeah, so like I said, we've seen it exchanged from French to British to United States, and of course, like was mentioned earlier, it it was traditionally occupied by indigenous people. So so a more comprehensive list of the appeals on Mackinac Island. We went over the megaliths such as Ark Rock and the Sugarloaf. Sugarloaf. People just really like to see these nice geological, natural structures. It's, in my opinion, really humbling to see that kind of thing. And like I said, um, I don't know about other people, but I don't generally associate Michigan with megaliths. So it's just really neat that there's so much going on the island. Um, they have world-renowned fudge. They make homemade fudge, all kinds of little shops around the island. It's a really big deal. People really like it. It is really good. I've had some of the fudge. Um, the island is automobile free, and that's really no joke. Like there are some kind of first response vehicles in cases of emergency, but largely if you're traveling down the streets and the sidewalks, you're not going to see any cars. You're going to see people, tons of pedestrians, bicycles, horses, horse-drawn carriages, bicycle-drawn carriages. Um, the island itself is self-sustaining. They grow most of their food, and you'll even see like outside storefronts and homes all along the streets. There's just they have their gardens out, and it's really pretty. And yep, just people are growing a lot of their own food, which I think is definitely characteristic of a place being environmentally conscious. And so, because of that, there's just so much appeal to the island as far as ecotourism goes. So I mentioned this earlier that Mackinac Island was Mackinac National Park. Um, so it was actually the the nation's second national park, um, which then control was transferred to the state of Michigan, where it became a state park. But that the fact that it was ever labeled as a national park just is really significant, and you see how people view the island itself. That um, people are really proud to have visited there, like be from Michigan. Um, it's just really unique, and I think they're doing a lot of great things. By the 1800s, tourism became the main industry for the island. Unsurprisingly, like I said, with so much historical, natural appeal, and the kind of the thing about the automobile ban, people seem to find really appealing. I know I do personally. It's nice to see horses and it all over the island, and it's nice to see cyclists and pedestrians, and it kind of takes you back in time to a simpler time. So I think that's one of the things that appeals to a large amount of people, um, is just stepping back in time a little bit and not worrying about uh, traffic and everything. Just you know. So again, eco-friendly attributes the automobile ban. Obviously, that causes for significantly less emissions on the island, which is great. Um, Self-sustaining island. They grow their own food. Um, Another fundamental of ecotourism is educational opportunities, which there are tons of on the island. Like I said, Fort Mackinac, you can go do a tour. Um, you can you can pretty much tour the whole island in a horse-drawn carriage, and have a really knowledgeable guide teach you about all the things that you'd want to learn about the island. And another thing is that I found this kind of surprising, that since it is such a renowned tourist destination, but there are no major hotel chains on the island. These are like small scale, independently owned hotels, and there's plenty of them, so you have an opportunity to visit a really nice hotel that isn't a chain and feel good about supporting the local economy and in those ways. Because I think the population of the island was around 5 or 600, which it sounds like a really small amount, but the island is so small that it's actually appropriate. So, um, with tourism industry being as big as it is, you probably have most of the people that actually live on the island working in the industry, and working for these hotels that aren't chain run. And I think that also really appeals to the ecotourism aspect of the island. And yeah, so in later on in the written part of my presentation, like I said, we go more in depth into the itinerary and like certain experiences that can be offered on the island, and definitely we're gonna talk more about um, the indigenous occupation of the island and how moving forward for an ecotourism destination, um, these things need to be addressed. So, yeah, that's Mackinac Island in a nutshell.